In 1721, when a Norwegian missionary arrived on the shores of Greenland by ship, he hoped to find the Viking settlers who had lived there for hundreds of years. But he found only ruined stone walls. The people were gone, as if they had vanished en masse. For 500 years, these people who had survived in one of the world's harshest places suddenly disappeared one day, and no one even noticed. Greenland's Viking colony is perhaps one of history's greatest lost civilization mysteries. Because these people weren't just a group of nomads who got lost. They were a civilization that had lived for centuries, with their farms, churches, and organized societies, survived, even prospered. Then they suddenly vanished. So why, and how? The answer to this question is far more complex and far more disturbing than you think. It all started with a murder. Actually, several murders. A hot-tempered Viking named Erik the Red had been exiled from Norway for killing a man. He fled to Iceland, but there too he fought with his neighbors and committed murder again. This time exile wasn't enough. He was expelled from Iceland as well. In 985, Erik decided to go somewhere else. He headed west, toward the unknown. And there he found an island. The island wasn't really green. It was covered by a massive ice sheet, but Erik was a clever marketer. He called the island Greenland, because he knew that if he wanted to bring people there, it had to look appealing. And it worked. Years later, Erik returned with 14 ships. The ships carried hundreds of settlers, families, farmers, animals, tools, hopes. They were going to the end of the world. And Erik had promised them a green paradise. But Greenland was not a paradise. There was a livable climate in only 2 regions, the fjords on the southwest coast. Erik and his men established 2 settlements there. Up to 3,000 people lived in the eastern settlement, and about 500 in the western settlement. These people engaged in farming. They raised sheep, goats, and cattle. They built churches. Even a bishop came. They tried to live like they did in Europe. But here everything was much harder. The growing season was short. The soil was poor. Growing enough hay for the animals throughout winter was nearly impossible, and it was always cold. But they survived. In fact, they adapted incredibly well, because the Greenland Vikings were far smarter and more flexible than you might think. But the real question is, if they were so adaptable and capable, why did they suddenly vanish one day? The struggle for survival. In the early years, the Greenland Vikings relied almost entirely on agriculture. 80% of their diet came from crops they grew on land, only 20% from the sea. But over time, this ratio reversed. By the 14th century, 80% of their diet was seafood, especially seals. The oil, meat, and skins they obtained from seals were vital. They were no longer living like European farmers, but like Arctic hunters. But it wasn't just seals. The Vikings were after something far more dangerous: walrus ivory. Walrus ivory was as valuable as gold in Europe at that time, because the ivory supply had been cut off by Muslim conquests, and Europe needed an ivory alternative. Walrus ivory filled that gap. The wealthy wanted jewelry, chess sets, and decorations made from walrus ivory. And Greenland was one of the world's best walrus hunting spots. But walrus hunting was deadly work. Vikings would travel in open boats on a dangerous 15-day journey north to Disco Bay. There they would kill giant walruses and collect their tusks. The journey was filled with cold, storms, and the risk of drowning. But the profit was also very high. This hunting was Greenland's economic lifeline. Thanks to walrus ivory, they could trade with Europe. In return, they received iron tools, grain, wine, and luxury fabrics. They even exported live polar bears. The Greenland Vikings were a trading colony at Europe's furthest edge, selling exotic Arctic products. But this system was very fragile, because everything depended on walruses, Europe, and ships. The beginning of the end. Imagine a winter morning on a Viking farm. The surroundings are covered in ice. The wind howls through the stone houses as it passes through the fjord. The breath of the sheep in the barn rises as steam. Smoke from the wood fire slowly emerges from the stone chimney. Women collect manure and spread it on the fields because there's no other way to keep the soil fertile. The men are at sea. Maybe they'll return, maybe they won't. Life passes in waiting. Every season is a gamble, every winter an exam. But after the 1350s, things began to change, and this change was slowly, unnoticed, rotting the colony's foundations. The end of the Greenland Vikings cannot be explained by a single cause, Because what killed them wasn't one disaster. What killed them was small crises piling on top of each other, and that's what was truly terrifying. 1. Climate change. But not as you think. For years, historians thought there was the medieval warm period in Greenland, so the Vikings settled. Then the Little Ice Age came and the ice killed them. But new research has disproved this. Indeed, when the Greenland Vikings arrived, the climate was already cold. The medieval warm period hadn't extended to Greenland. So the Vikings never saw a green Greenland. Erik had already deceived them. But this doesn't mean climate played no role. The climate didn't stay cold. The climate got even worse. Storms increased. Seas became covered with ice. Hay production became more difficult. And most importantly, drought began. Recent research shows there were prolonged droughts in Greenland. There wasn't enough rain in summer. Grass didn't grow. Animals couldn't survive the winter. Modern Greenland farmers face the same problem today. If it doesn't rain, our animals starve. But still, the Vikings could have adapted to this. They could have hunted more. They could have eaten more seal. The problem wasn't just the climate. 2. Economic isolation, the collapse of walrus ivory. From the mid-13th century, demand for walrus ivory in Europe began to decline because ivory supply reopened. Walrus ivory was no longer that valuable, and this was a disaster for Greenland, because walrus ivory was their only export commodity. Without walrus ivory, they had nothing to give to Europe. European merchants no longer came to Greenland, because there was nothing worth buying. Ships weren't coming, iron wasn't coming, grain wasn't coming, wine wasn't coming, and most importantly, new people weren't coming. Greenland was slowly losing its connection with Europe. They were becoming isolated, and no one cared. 3. Population and labor crisis. Walrus hunting required a lot of labor. Men were at sea for days, for weeks. Meanwhile, there were no people left to work on the farms. Women and the elderly tried to manage the fields, but it wasn't enough. Moreover, walrus hunting was deadly work. If a boat sank, the entire crew was lost, never to return. Each loss reduced the colony's workforce, and the losses were accumulating. Birth rates were also low. Living in Greenland was hard. Child mortality was high. Young people were beginning to think about returning to Europe, because they had no future in Greenland. A monotonous life, a monotonous diet, a world where nothing changed. Who would want to live in such a place? 4. The burden of the church. The church was very powerful in Greenland. By the mid-14th century, the church owned 2/3 of the island's best pastures. People paid taxes to the church. These taxes went to the Crusades. They went to wars against heretics in Italy. But nothing came back to Greenland. Moreover, bishops no longer wanted to come to Greenland. It was too far, too cold. Some received the title of bishop but never went. They prayed from afar. The church was exploiting Greenland but wasn't interested. 5. Sea level rise. A silent catastrophe. Recent research found something surprising. Sea level rise in Greenland was much greater than estimated. In the 14th century, sea level rose about 3 meters. This meant dozens of square kilometers of fertile farmland went underwater. The best pastures at the edges of the fjords disappeared, and the Vikings could do nothing about it. The last days. Imagine an elderly Viking sitting in a farmhouse. Snow is falling outside. He's sitting by the fire trying to warm up. His son is at sea, hasn't returned for 2 weeks. His daughter got sick last winter, couldn't recover, no grandchildren. The church collected taxes, no grain left. The sheep are thin. The land won't be fertile in spring, and the last ship from outside was 3 years ago. This man asks himself, what are we doing here? But the biggest mystery still hasn't been solved, because these people didn't disappear overnight. They vanished slowly, silently. So what exactly happened? Did they die? Did they flee? The final record, September 16th, 1408. A wedding was held in the stone church at Valsey. An Icelandic man married a Greenlandic girl. This wedding was recorded in 3 different letters. This is the last written record from the Greenland Viking colony. There were no signs of crisis at the wedding. No hunger, disaster, panic. Just a normal wedding. People celebrated, ate, drank. Then, nothing. No more records ever. The western settlement had been abandoned in the 1350s. One record says, they gathered a force and sailed northwest. But when they arrived, They found neither Christian nor pagan, only wild sheep and cattle. So the western settlement had been silently evacuated. The eastern settlement held out a bit longer. It's estimated that there were people there until the 1450s. But then that ended too. When Norwegian missionary Hans Egede arrived in Greenland in 1721, he found only ruined church walls. Inuit hunters showed him Viking remains, but there were no people. A 500-year-old civilization had vanished as if it had never existed. Theories experts still can't give a definitive answer today. But there are several theories. Theory 1. Slow migration. Perhaps the Vikings slowly returned to Europe, in small groups over years. They went to Iceland, Norway, by ship. But no one recorded them. Because small refugee groups don't make it into history. This makes sense. But what's strange is this. There are no records in Iceland. No poems, no sagas, no stories. No one saying we're returning from Greenland. This is very odd, because Vikings recorded everything. Theory 2. Lost at sea. Perhaps there was a mass escape attempt. All the remaining population got on ships and tried to go to Europe, but a storm hit, the boats sank, everyone died. This is also possible, but again the same problem. No records, no shipwreck remains found. Theory 3. Conflict with the Inuit. Some sources claim the Inuit attacked the Vikings. Perhaps there was a war. Perhaps the Vikings were defeated. But archaeological evidence doesn't support this. There's no trace of mass slaughter. No bodies, no weapon traces, no signs of war. Moreover, Vikings and Inuit had lived side by side for centuries. Why would there suddenly be a war? Theory 4. Starvation and slow death. Perhaps their end was very slow and merciless. Perhaps fewer and fewer people remained. Hunger, disease, cold. They died one by one, their bodies mixed with the soil. When the last person died, nothing remained. This is the darkest theory, and perhaps the most realistic one. The lesson. Imagine a Viking cemetery in Greenland. Stone gravestones, frozen ground, silence. Thousands of Vikings are buried in this cemetery. But at some point the burial stopped, because there was no one left to bury. Imagine, the last Viking, alone, old, sick, no one around, houses empty, church empty, no animals. And he knows that when he dies, there will be no one to bury him. He is the last breath of a civilization. Then he dies, and silence. The Greenland Vikings were far more successful than we thought. They weren't stubborn, conservative, unchanging people. Quite the opposite. They were very adaptive. They changed their diet. They switched to hunting. They used new technologies. They learned some things from the Inuit. They tried everything. But they still failed. Because sometimes adaptation isn't enough. Sometimes the problems a society faces are much bigger than individual efforts. The climate worsened, the economy collapsed, population decreased, Europe forgot them. And at some point, there was no turning back. What's most striking is this. No one noticed. No one in Europe said, "We're not hearing from Greenland." No one organized a rescue expedition. No one cared. Because Greenland was already at the edge of the world map, insignificant, forgettable, and it was forgotten. An echo from the past. But perhaps the story of the Greenland Vikings isn't just about the past. Perhaps it's also about today. Greenland's Viking colony contains one of history's saddest lessons. Adaptation doesn't always guarantee survival. These people did everything right. They changed, adapted, resisted, but they still lost. Because the system they lived in was itself unsustainable. Economic isolation, climate crisis, diminishing resources, disconnection from the outside world. Don't these sound familiar today? The Greenland Vikings lived at the edge of the world. They were dependent on the outside world. They were fighting a changing climate. And one day the outside world forgot them. Today, similar dangers are everywhere. Small communities, economic dependence, climate change, the fear of being forgotten. Does history always repeat itself? Perhaps not. But the patterns are similar. The final silence. An archaeologist in Greenland is excavating at an old Viking farm. The soil is frozen. The stones have decayed. But there's still a stone wall standing. This wall was part of a family's home 600 years ago. We don't know that family's name. We don't know their faces. We don't know how they died. But we know this. They were here. They lived. They hoped. They struggled. and then they disappeared. The archaeologist pulls a small bone fragment from the soil, a sheep's bone. Perhaps this bone was part of that family's last meal. Perhaps it was the last thing they ate. The archaeologist looks at the bone and asks himself, I wonder when the last person died. Did they realize it? Did they know they were the last representative of a civilization? We'll never know the answer. The Vikings of Greenland disappeared, but their stories are still hidden in the ground. Every year glaciers melt and new remains emerge, but at the same time the permafrost is melting and old evidence is disappearing, so there's a race. Archaeologists are trying to record history before it's lost. Maybe one day we'll find the real answer. Maybe one day we'll learn exactly what happened to them. But maybe we never will. Because sometimes history disappears silently, and only stone walls remain. And questions, always questions. The Vikings of Greenland vanished, but their silence still echoes today.